From this day forward, my dear, you'll be providing for yourself. Enough living off my earnings, the husband declared with pride. I calmly agreed, but when, on his birthday, he brought home 20 relatives who adored freeloading, everyone was stunned when they peeked into the kitchen. And before we continue, please tell me what country you are from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. Natalia would wake before her alarm. She had grown accustomed to it over the years, as her husband left for his shift at 7 in the morning. A small lamp glowed under the cabinet in the kitchen. The clock ticked. The kettle whispered softly. The house breathed evenly, like a person free from troubled dreams. Natalia loved these mornings. For half an hour, everything was still hers, a time when she could unhurriedly boil water, wash a couple of plates, did wipe down the table, and then put porridge on to cook. Her hand would instinctively reach for the glass jar of oatmeal, the salt shaker with its narrow holes, the small, thick-bottomed pot that had survived 2 moves, a renovation, and many family discussions. Victor wouldn't emerge from the bedroom right away. First he'd rustle the newspaper in his own space, then open the door and quietly take his seat at the table. Natalia would set down a mug of strong tea, 1 sugar cube, a couple of slices of bread, and honey in a small dish. Her husband enjoyed dipping the corner of his bread in the honey and invariably recounting how his grandfather in the village used to do the same. Lately, his grandfather was recalled less often and more frequently. The news, prices, how everyone was tired of it all. "Sugar's gone up again," Victor said that morning when it all began. "It's highway robbery in the shops and you keep buying and buying. I don't print money." "I bought it on sale," Natalia replied. "It was a good deal." "Always on sale with you, and in the end, empty pockets," he chuckled. "I calculated how much went on food in a month, and there's only 1 salary." Natalia didn't argue. She knew that if a person's head was full of steam, it was better for it to escape through words. It was safer than silence. She placed a bowl of porridge on the table, a plate with a sliced apple, and sat down opposite him in silence, straightening the towel on the back of her chair. And anyway, Victor put down his spoon. "I've decided. From this day forward, you'll be providing for yourself. Enough living off my earnings." He uttered this too loudly for the small kitchen, as if addressing an audience rather than the woman he had lived with for over 20 years. His voice held a sense of unearned victory. Natalia looked at his hands. Blue veins, a scrape on a knuckle. He had dropped a tool at work yesterday. These hands smelled of iron and oil from the workshop, and once it was these hands that helped her hang curtains, carried nets of potatoes home, and carried Kshusha on his shoulders. The thought warmed her slightly from within. She didn't rush to respond. "All right," she said calmly. "Let it be so." Victor froze. He had expected an argument, tears. A long-held habit told him that now would follow a "but what about?" and a "but you." But nothing followed. Natalia got up, poured him more tea. I moved the apple closer to his hand, as she always did. Her face was composed. No hurt, no pride, as if he had announced a change in the weather. After breakfast, she rearranged the jars on the refrigerator shelf to her liking and quietly taped 2 paper rectangles to the inner wall. On one she wrote, "Natalia." On the other, "Victor." These papers posed no threat. They were simple, like children's labels. But each time Victor opened the refrigerator, his eyes encountered the division he himself had conceived. The first week went smoothly. Natalia bought little for herself: buckwheat, cottage cheese, apples, occasionally a piece of chicken breast. It was enough for 2 dinners. Once in a while, she baked zucchini fritters if they were cheap at the market. Victor would return, tired, dive into his own provisions, eating what he bought himself: sausages, bread, store-bought pickles, canned goods, quick and unceremonious. He didn't go hungry, but they no longer sat at the table together. He was accustomed to grumbling at his plate, she to lighting the kitchen lamp and reading in the evenings. The second week, Victor began complaining to his mother on the phone. His voice was sonorous, aggrieved. "Mom, imagine, she's become completely brazen, only cooks for herself. I'm working here, and she's eating her porridge." Natalia walked past and smiled. A small lie always puts a person in an awkward position when the truth arrives. She didn't want to catch her husband in his words and show how porridge turned into care, but he had set it up himself. The curtain was rising like a balloon on a string. Monday brought new news. Victor returned in the evening, the smelling of gasoline and cold air. He kicked off his boots by the door and announced loudly, "People are coming over on Saturday. You haven't forgotten my birthday, have you? Aunt Raya, Uncle Leonia, Grisha Soleil, and everyone else, about 20 people." "I remember," Natalia replied. "Do you have the list?" "What list?" he asked, surprised. "For the groceries," she said calmly. "What needs to be bought and with what money? We have separate shopping now, remember? Mine, yours, and your guests, your budget." Victor shifted from foot to foot. "What's the big deal? I'll get potatoes, some meat, and you'll make a salad. You're good at doing things quickly." "I am good at it," Natalia agreed, "but I make it from the products I buy myself. For guests, we need to buy separately. Let's list what's needed." They sat at the table. Natalia opened a notebook and wrote neatly. Olivier salad, sausage, potatoes, eggs, peas, cucumbers, mayonnaise. Herring under a fur coat. Herring, beets, carrots, potatoes, onions, mayonnaise. Main course, meat, about 3 kilograms, potatoes, spices. Appetizers, cheese, sausage, greens, drinks, juice, soda, water, tea, coffee, bread, fruit. Victor rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That's a lot," he mumbled. "We can simplify," she suggested. "For example, make only one main dish, cut back on some appetizers, and it'll be half the price." "But what about the salads?" he asked, his tone doubtful. "People are used to them." "People are used to them," Natalia confirmed. "Choose. It's your company, your budget." He went to the side table, took out his wallet, and turned it over. He counted for a long time. Then he said, "All right. I'll buy them at the market. I know where it's cheaper." "Excellent," Natalia nodded. "I'll write down a list of places where the quality is better." She wasn't trying to humiliate anyone, nor was she plotting revenge. She was simply living by the arrangement he himself had proposed, straightforwardly and clearly. What would come of it, Saturday would decide. On Friday, Victor came home later than usual and brought a bag of groceries, 2 loaves of bread, a kilogram of sausages, a jar of mayonnaise, bruised, sale-priced cucumbers, and a chicken with a dubious appearance, its price tag obscuring half the expiration date, tumbled onto the table. "Are you buying anything else?" Natalia asked quietly. "No money," he cut her off. "It'll be fine. We're not at a restaurant." "Not at a restaurant," she agreed. "All right." She rinsed the cucumbers and put some in a bowl of cold water. The chicken had a strange smell. Natalia sniffed and grimaced. Victor caught her look and grumbled discontentedly. "It's fine. Just rinse it and put it in the oven." "You know," Natalia said, "let's have something else for the main course. You bought sausages. We have potatoes at home. Sausages with potatoes are also hot." "Sausages for a birthday dinner," he said, incredulous. "That's what you bought," she reminded him. He shrugged, as if dismissing an uncomfortable thought of his own. Saturday began with Natalia mopping the floor, dusting, and getting out a clean tablecloth. She loved order. She breathed easier in a clean room. In the morning, she called Victor's sister, Taisia. "Around 2 o'clock, Taisia chirped. "We'll be there as always." "Oh, Natasha. Thanks, don't go to any trouble." "All right," Natalia replied. There was no malice in her voice. By 2 o'clock, the table was set. Plates, forks, 3 salad bowls filled with sliced cucumbers, green onions, and radishes. Natalia had bought these for her own week and decided not to put them away. They would serve as decoration, but she didn't mix the salads with mayonnaise. They were simply bowls of vegetables. The bread was sliced, the sausages lay ready for the oven. She brought out 3 small plates of pickles from her own reserves. She always made some things herself, but this time she put out small portions, mindful of her own section of the shelf. Victor's sister's son would bring the cake. Aunt Raya had promised herring. And that was that. Victor had been rushing around pointlessly since morning, as if the dishes would appear by magic through his frantic activity. He grew irritable, peered into pots, poked at bowls with a spoon, wanting to say something, but met with a calm gaze. There was no anger in it, so there was nowhere for his words to land. The first guests arrived with a cheerful clamor. Aunt Raya in a colorful scarf, carrying a homemade herring on a paper plate. Uncle Lyonya with his trademark phrase, "Where can I wash my hands?" Nephew Grisha in an unbuttoned jacket, empty-handed because I'm family. Tasia entered last in a silk blouse, with the air of a hostess who expected everyone to explain themselves. "Well, birthday boy," Uncle Lyonya boomed. "How old are you turning?" "Old," Victor grinned, but his smile held less confidence than usual. They greeted Natalia with kisses on the cheek, pressed a small bag of candies into her hand, and then headed for the kitchen. "Let's see what we have." And then silence descended, the kind you can hear a dropped coin on tiles. On the refrigerator shelf hung two neat labels, Natalia and Victor. Under Victor's name lay an open jar of mayonnaise, 2 eggs, and a sliced loaf of bread. In the vegetable drawer, a bag of bruised, already yesterday's cucumbers, huddled with radishes. On the top shelf, under a plastic box, stood 3 neatly labeled containers. Natalia, lunch for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. In a container was stewed cabbage and a couple of cutlets, prepared by her for the week. Taisia reached for a container, but her hand froze on the label. She read aloud, as if seeing the letters for the first time. Natalia, lunch, do not touch. Uncle Lyonya, who habitually peered into pots, lifted lids. Empty. On the stove was only a large frying pan where the sausages sizzled. On the table were sliced cucumbers, greens, bread. Aunt Raya's herring was the main adornment of the table. "Is that all?" Taisia asked, looking at her brother. "What did you expect?" Natalia entered the kitchen, wiped her hands on a towel, and smiled. "Vitya announced separate budgets. I prepared what he bought for the guests. He bought sausages, bread, and cucumbers. The herring is yours. Thank you so much." Taisia stared as if she hadn't heard, and her tongue remembered only one kind of speech. Commands. "Natasha, that's not respectable. People came. It's a birthday." "Living by his rules," Natalia replied. "Vitya wanted it. I complied. I have my own groceries. Here they are, labeled. I prepared them for guests from his purchase for the week. If anything is missing, we'll buy it together. The store is nearby." Victor shifted by the doorway. He was red as a beet, and the determined wind of his confidence had evaporated in an instant. Aunt Raya hurried over and moved her herring to the central serving dish. Uncle Lyonya grunted but said nothing. Grisha, who usually ate the most, looked at the sausages as if they were aliens. "Vitya," Taisia called, "go to the store and get some meat." "For what?" Natalia asked calmly. "Do you have money?" "I don't take my own," Taisia retorted. "You said separate, and I have my budget for the week. I didn't plan for a crowd." Victor sighed, then said, "I'll go." He left and returned about 40 minutes later, tired, sweating, and carrying 2 slightly frozen pieces of poultry that had been sitting on the counter all day. Natalia looked at the meat and shook her head. "We won't risk it. Let's do this. Today we have sausages, your herring, cucumbers, bread, tea, cake. It will be a simple meal. If anyone needs more, there's a cafeteria nearby. We'll buy each person a hot meal at their own expense. That's fair." "Goodness gracious!" Taisia exclaimed. "I've never seen such a disgrace." "It's not a disgrace," Natalia replied. "It's living by the words you yourself spoke. You wanted separation. Here it is. I'm not humiliating anyone, not hiding anything. I'm simply not spending my money on what you consider a given." She spoke without anger, as if explaining to adult children, concisely and clearly. A quiet, awkward laugh was heard in the room. It was the younger cousin, natural and quick-witted, who whispered to her husband, "Our Victor has really gotten himself into a pickle." The cake was brought out after tea, and the candles were lit. They sang "Happy Birthday," a little subdued, but they still sang. Natalia cut portions into equal pieces so no one would feel slighted. Conversations at the table would slide, like from a hill in childhood, quickly and in the wrong direction. The guests, realizing there would be no lavish feast, began talking about the weather, prices, children. Someone sighed. It used to be better. No one answered. After the cake, people began to leave. Aunt Raya, as she was leaving, leaned towards Natalia. You did the right thing. A man needs to understand that his words aren't a game. I wasn't disciplining anyone, Natalia replied. I was just living by his rule. When the door closed behind the last guest, the apartment became quiet for the first time that day. Victor stood in the hallway, leaning against the closet. He didn't look stunned, but rather tired and somewhat hollow. Well, you've shamed me, he said, not looking her in the eye. No, Natalia replied calmly. I didn't point fingers. I didn't shout. I didn't say anything superfluous. I did nothing to make anyone look worse. I simply didn't do anything extra for those who are convinced they are entitled to everything. Family, he began. Family is not an accounting department, Natalia said, placing her palm on the table. Family members take responsibility. If any of them had said today, we'll buy it ourselves, I would have gone and helped, but no one did. And that's also an answer. Victor lowered his eyes. His shoulders seemed to slump. The hostess left the hallway like a draft and closed the door behind her. He went to the kitchen, looked at the plates, turned on the water, and began washing the dishes. Clumsily, noisily, more than necessary. He splashed, dropped spoons, scraped the sides of plates with the sponge as if they had offended him. Natalia stood nearby, adjusting the faucet from hot to warm, moving the drying rack away from the edge so nothing would fall. They said nothing, washing, drying, putting things away. For the first time in a long time, they were doing something together without instructions or reproaches. In the evening, Victor sat on a chair in the room and spoke quietly. I've been thinking. I said something foolish. I didn't think it through. I thought like this. I'll shame her. But there's nothing to shame you for. You've carried everything for so many years. Not always, Natalia replied. We are both adults. Everyone has dignity. When a person says something important, they should think about what to do with those words tomorrow. I'll go to the store tomorrow, he said, as if promising a third party. I'll buy everything you say, and I'll try not to economize where I shouldn't. I'm not right. I'm not asking for words. Natalia nodded. I'm waiting for actions, but thank you for saying it. The next morning, he got up early and came back with bags. There were no random purchases in the bags. Everything was on the list. Meat for soup, fish, cottage cheese, good grains, vegetables. Natalia silently unpacked, put some in the refrigerator, some in the freezer, and put water on to boil. The house filled with a familiar aroma, not of a celebration, but of an ordinary kitchen where there would be soup for tomorrow, porridge for the day after, and a pie they would eat together in the evening, because it's good with tea. Victor pocketed his money for the week. He didn't like cards. He preferred cash. He neatly signed a sheet. Meat, Tuesday, milk, Thursday, vegetables, Saturday. He placed it on the refrigerator. Natalia remained silent. When an adult takes steps on their own, there's no point walking beside them with a pointer. In the afternoon, Taisia called. Her voice wasn't as confident. Natasha, well, you really surprised us yesterday, but maybe I was too hasty. Vitya is to blame himself. He grumbles like my cat. He wants things done for him, and then he'll say thank you if he remembers. I'm sorry if I offended you. I wasn't offended, Natalia said. Everyone has their own life and their own lessons. How about I bring some meat over on the weekend, and we'll sit, just the three of us, without a crowd? Bring it over, Natalia replied. We'll just sit quietly. She hung up and thought that this was a small victory, not in her life, but in theirs. For a while the relatives kept their distance. Every call was met with short phrases, without old jokes. How are you? How's your health? How can we help? Sometimes it seemed foreign, but then it became habitual. Leonia brought potatoes from the village a couple of times. Aunt Raya brought homemade sour cream. Taisia baked a pie and sat at the table calmly, without her usual oversight. One evening, Victor brought home a small envelope. What's this? Natalia asked. Just a gift certificate to a kitchenware store. I got a bonus. Let's choose a new pot, that big one for borscht. Natalia smiled. Sometimes happiness comes not with fireworks, but with a thick-walled pot. Let's, she said, but we'll choose it together, and we'll be together too. As they walked, he paused by the window of a hardware store and looked at their reflections. Beside him was her, in a light coat with a neat scarf. Not a girl, not a young wife, but a woman who had taught him something simple. Not words, but consistency. The words he learned himself. First the loud ones, then the necessary ones. The unnecessary ones faded away. One evening, Uncle Ionia called and asked, "Can we come over on Sunday? Just the two of us, not a crowd. I'll bring herring. Raya will bring a pie. We'll pay for the groceries. Don't worry. Just to sit and chat." "Come over," Victor replied. "But honestly, no give us everything at once anymore." "All right," Leonia said. On Sunday they sat, the four of them, talked about fishing, renovations, children. No one peeked into anyone else's pots. No one joked at anyone else's expense. No one counted anyone else's expenses. After the guests left, there was no heaviness in the house. Only cups with sugared rims and a clean tablecloth remained. That evening, they sat on the balcony for a long time, talking about which samovar was better, electric or old-fashioned, over coals, laughing about how they once overturned Olivier salad right onto the tablecloth. Everything was close at hand, within reach. No proof was needed, no extra words. Life hadn't become a fairy tale, it had become understandable. Victor no longer brought crowds without warning, and didn't boast about other people's work. The relatives stopped viewing Natalia's hands as a communal resource. There were no more papers in the refrigerator, but each person had found shelves in their mind clearly labeled, "Mine, ours." And above all the shelves, a simple sign, "Respect." And at the end of summer, Natalia took out old photographs from a drawer and suggested Victor create a new album. They pasted a picture from that very birthday into it. Not of the empty table and sausages, but of the cake, the candles, and 2 plates of greens. On the back, Natalia wrote, "The day we stood up for each other again."